When I was 38, I traveled back home to go to my high school reunion. I flew into the airport and rented a car. The drive was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the state. About 5 miles outside of town, I see a person standing on the side of the road flagging me down. It turned out that it was one of the guys I went to school with. His name was Tim, and I hadn't seen or talked to him in 20 years. He gets in the car and we start talking. He still looked about the same, oddly young looking for someone my age. We get to town and I asked him if he wants to come to the Dive, our favorite bar, and have a drink. He says, "No, I don't drink anymore, just take me home." Tim's parents lived a few blocks from my aunt's house, so I turned the car in that direction, but he asked me to take him to the outskirts of town. There was an old mobile home park out there, and I figured that is where he lived now. When we reached the end of the road, he said, "Just drop me here. It was great to see you again." And he walked off into the night. I go to the Dive to meet some of my old friends, and we start to talk. As we are talking about the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked up Tim about 5 miles outside of town and had dropped him off at his home. Everyone gets quiet. Even the guy singing karaoke stopped mid-song and lays down the microphone. My cousin's face goes white as a new t-shirt. "Nelson, Tim died on that curve nearly 9 years ago. Rolled his car over after he had a few drinks. We were all at his funeral." I was told. I started to feel really lightheaded, so I went outside to take some deep breaths. As I looked in my car, there on the passenger seat is the local newspaper, printed 9 years ago, containing Tim's obituary.
Number 2. The Window.
I was about 5 years old when my parents got a divorce. My mom had moved out and was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I liked to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our bedrooms were at the end of a hallway directly across from each other. Our little apartment was on the first floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer, and my mom had a window open in her room which was directly behind the bed above the headboard. One night, I woke up and recall sitting up and seeing our cat crouched in the doorframe of my mom's room. Her door was open, so we could get some airflow through the apartment, and you could partially see into my bedroom. It was strange to see our cat there because he was almost always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he slowly crept into my bedroom and hissed. I turned over to face my mom and wake her up. In the 3 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up in the doorframe, and there was a man standing by my open door, slowly making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother picked me up and literally threw me out of the screen window. We were on the first floor, and it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground, and she quickly followed out the window. We both started screaming for help, and one of the neighbors called 911. The police arrived quickly, but they didn't find anyone or see any signs of forced entry. My window was closed and locked as well. Only our front door was unlocked from the inside, which led them to believe the man must have left that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, my mom was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater storage closet and found a notebook with a few names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. She called the police again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been hiding in our house and waited until we were asleep.
Number 3. Footsteps.
Many years ago, my aunt was home alone when she heard someone open the door and walked into the hallway. Since her husband, my uncle, was out of town and not supposed to get home for a few more hours, she went downstairs to see if someone was there. She did not see anyone, but outside the door she saw a footstep in the snow leading to the door, but not any leading away from it. On a second glance, she saw a pair of my uncle's shoes in the hallway, still with snow on them. She thought my uncle arrived home early and was hiding and trying to surprise her. She looked around the whole house and called out his name for 20 minutes. Eventually, she got concerned and ran to the phone and called the police. When they came home and searched the house, they couldn't find anyone, just the tracks up to the front door and the shoes in the hallway. An hour after the police left, a sheriff's car arrived and the deputy informed my aunt that her husband had been killed a few hours earlier on the highway. His car had broken down and he was walking in the snow on the side of the road where he was struck by a car and killed.
Me and my wife were on our honeymoon in Hawaii. We were on the island of Oahu, sitting on the beach. My wife got up to go to the bathroom, and when she got back, she told me that there was a creepy man watching her walk into the bathroom, and when she tried to walk out, he blocked her path. She only got away because there were two other people walking to the bathroom, so he got out of the way. I asked her what the man looked like, and she looked over, but unfortunately he was gone. Our hotel was within walking distance from the beach, so we got back quickly, but we made sure to report the man to a police officer walking near the beach. Then we cleaned up before going out to eat. We ate at a fancy seafood place and did some walking around afterwards. Close to midnight, we finally went back to the room and began to wind down. Then we got a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole in the door and saw a man in a maid uniform standing outside. I opened the door, and he immediately tried to let himself in. I pushed him back a bit, asking him what he wanted. He told me he left something in the room while cleaning earlier, and he needed to get it out. The only thing, we left a do not disturb sign on the door all day. Then I noticed he was making eye contact with my wife. My wife then screamed,
"That's the man!"
I didn't understand at first, but it was too late for that. The man had already lunged at me, holding my throat with one hand while reaching behind himself with another. He pulled out a knife and started swinging at me. And if it weren't for my wife coming over and smashing his face with a lamp, I would have been as good as dead. The commotion drew out all the tourists to the nearby rooms. One of the women started freaking out and screaming, making the situation even worse. I called the police. So did the hotel. It turned into a huge, horrible scene, but we were just happy to be alive. We were questioned when the police arrived, and some of the people around us claimed to have witnessed it all. We still don't know what kind of intentions this guy had. But if I had to guess, I would say he wanted to get to my wife. He must have been one very dumb person to think he would get away with something like this in a public resort.
Ever since I was little, my godmother would always take care of me. She had a healing power, meaning she could cure stomach aches, headaches, pain in the body, and all sorts of discomforts with just a prayer and white towels. She had this magical way about her with just her presence was enough to comfort you. I loved her dearly and remembered going over to her house at times, which was right next to my parents' house. However, sometimes when I visited her, she would seem like she was out of it. She would randomly speak to the wind in different tongues and languages that I didn't understand. She also had this old radio, which was always playing the news in the background, and it would lose the signal randomly as she cooked in the kitchen. She was always nice to me and never did anything that scared me, but I did notice some weird patterns and behaviors from time to time. My house had 2 floors, and my room was located on the 2nd floor. One night, I remember having this weird feeling before going to sleep and had trouble closing my eyes. It felt as if there was a presence in my room that would not let me rest. After many episodes of blinking, closing, and opening my eyes in intervals, I finally fell asleep. What happened next still haunts me to this day. I started foaming at the mouth all of a sudden. My entire body was shaking uncontrollably, and I was making this humming sound that would get louder and louder. And my parents rushed into my room, disturbed by the horrible noises I was making, and tried to wake me up in an attempt to help me snap out of whatever I was going through. I was having an intense nightmare where I would try to reach out to my godmother to hug her, and she would disappear and appear in a different spot away from me. I was sweating and still foaming at the mouth, accompanied by the sustained shakes and jerks my entire body was making. I finally opened my eyes and looked at the window, and there was my godmother staring right at me, but she quickly disappeared. I found out later that she had died that night in her house. I work as a board operator from my high school and am studying to be a lighting designer. Now, our theater was known to be haunted, if you believe in that sort of thing. A student had died many years ago, and it was said he haunted the theater and messed with lighting. I figured it was just the way students dodged blame when they messed something up. Some stories said he died after falling from the grid, but in reality he had died of a rare form of cancer. All of this cast serious doubt on the ghost stories, and I didn't really believe in ghosts, so I never took it seriously. So I often forget to thank him at his plaque on the wall, as is school tradition. Back in my freshman year, during the first show I had been allowed to run the lightboard for, I was pretty nervous. Our stage manager assured me everything would be fine, and he even agreed to help me if needed. It was part way through the second night, and everything was going okay. I was still a little on edge because I was still new. Then about half an hour into the show, the stage manager begins to scowl. I ask him what's wrong, and he says that the spotlight operators think someone is up there with them. Our auditorium is set up so the only way to reach the catwalk and to be with the spotlighters is a ladder in the closet. It's the only way in, and it's placed in a hall we have blocked off on show nights. In addition, we make sure they lock the door behind them. They all seem really worried, and we had the thought there was some kind of serial killer up there. One of the spot people decides he is going to look around and try to find the intruder. Then after a minute, the spot people stop responding. We make sure the communication system is working, and it is. We try texting them, calling them, and nothing works. We send up our director to check on them. 5 minutes pass and still nothing. To make matters worse, our director never came back. We decided to send up the second guy, who had a solid 20 minutes until his next cue. 5 more minutes, and still nothing, and no one has come back. We are kind of freaking out, and then it happened. The loudest, most blood-curdling, clanging metal noise starts coming from the catwalk. We all stand up and begin flipping out, staring at the source of the noise, muttering profanities under our breaths. The actors and audiences are visibly frightened, but the show must go on. After about 5 seconds, the noises stop, and then the spotlight operators come back on, unaware that anything happened. The director comes back, and so does our sound guy. None of them had any idea what we were talking about. The director said it was probably just the heating system, except the school was too cheap to heat the building in the spring after hours. To this day, no one is exactly sure what happened, but me and the others in the booth that day are convinced it was our theater's ghost's way of reminding that I didn't thank him. I've never lived in a haunted house, but my mother did as a teen. Other houses on the street had strange things going on too. A family she knew well lived just a few houses away from. One night, the young girl down the street went to bed with a bad headache. The next day, she was dead. She'd passed away from an aneurysm. After her funeral, the family went away to get their minds off the tragedy, and her father asked my uncle to check on their pets. My mom and dad, who were dating at the time, went with him. My mother had heard there was a grand piano and she wanted to play it. My dad was studying to be a veterinarian. After entering the house, my uncle and my father headed to the basement to check on the animals, and my mother went to play the piano on the ground floor. She was playing it when she felt something brush her ankles. She thought a cat must have come up from the basement and walked past her, so she just kept playing. And then she felt it again. She looked under the piano and saw nothing. When she started playing again, she felt hands grab her ankles tightly. She jumped back in fright and dashed to the basement door, screamed for my uncle and father, and waited for them outside. Once my uncle and father were outside, my uncle could immediately tell my mom was scared and rattled and asked what was wrong. She told him what had happened, and he turned white as a ghost. He told her the daughter who had died used to play a game with her father. When he played the piano, she'd crawl underneath, grab his ankles, and push his feet up and down on the pedals.
Can you see me? I'm here. Behind you, look.
I never believed in ghosts, but a few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia, and it was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been living there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. A wooden board which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space lay fractured in two pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee or a ninja to break it. I thought the landlord might have sent someone to work in the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. But who? I emailed pictures to the landlord, asking if anyone had been there, with an undertone of annoyance since she hadn't warned me about the repair. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I called her, and she explained that her last two tenants had said the exact same thing happened to them. She promised to replace the board, and she did the very next day. About a month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. It felt like someone was rubbing his or her hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from the ceiling above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There is no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a cricket bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw that the brand new board covering the hole was broken in two. I felt sick. Sweat started dripping down my face and froze in terror. The dragging sound had stopped, but I heard something else. Whispering. The sound was clearly coming from above the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over. "It's your turn, it's your turn." And then it stopped. Dead silence. I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and still dark outside. I watched the TV to unwind, and then all of a sudden, the power shut off and everything went dark. My pet bird Dexter, who I kept in the kitchen, never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he was being strangled. I'd never heard him make those sort of noises. He was screaming. I was so freaked out I just left him there and grabbed my car keys, ran outside and sat in my car until the sun came up. When I saw people out walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went into the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a short version of the night. "Oh wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. I stayed in that apartment for 6 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. Although I moved out, the landlord recently called me. She said that her new tenants begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's going on, but I told her no way. It's their problem now.
Can you see me? I'm here. Behind you, look.
The creepy, old-fashioned porcelain doll with a Victorian appearance, red lips, rosy cheeks, and blue eyes may come to mind when one thinks of a haunted doll, but it's unlikely that anyone still keeps one in their house, unless that house is Warren's Occult Museum. However, those dolls are not the only ones getting possessed. Disney's Frozen Elsa doll, given as a Christmas 2013 gift in the Houston area, made headlines when it appeared to start acting strangely. For 2 years, the doll was working as it was supposed to, reciting phrases from the movie and singing "Let It Go" when a button was pressed. In 2015, it started randomly alternating between English and Spanish languages, even though this particular doll wasn't programmed to sing in Spanish. The woman who purchased the doll claimed that even with its switch off, the doll would start speaking and singing randomly. In December 2018, the family chose to get rid of the Elsa doll. Despite tossing it in the garbage, the family eventually discovered it hidden inside a bench in their living room weeks later. Following the discovery, Elsa started to speak and sing solely in Spanish, very soon after which the family made another attempt to scrap the Elsa doll. The doll was double bagged and put in the bottom of the garbage can, which was soon picked up by waste collectors. The family left for a trip sometime later, but when they got back, the haunted doll was waiting for them in their backyard. In their last attempt, the family sent Elsa through the mail to Bob, a friend in West Virginia who had a strange fancy for the occult. He fastened the possessed doll to the front bumper of his truck. According to the woman's most recent update in October 2020, the doll hasn't returned to Houston, but Bob did send a text that the doll was missing from the front of his truck.
Do you want to be my friend? Come play with me.
I was only about 15 when this happened, and the dude who was stalking me was a few years older. Let's call him Jim. I used to compete in equestrian events, and Jim's mom was the president of one of the clubs I belonged to. His mom dragged him along to an event one day where he must have seen me and taken a liking to me. I don't remember actually talking to or even meeting him that day, but he took it upon himself to look through the club's membership forms to find my phone number. Jim called me every single day, multiple times for months on end, twice on weekdays and 3 times on weekends. I politely told him that I wasn't interested, but he was convinced that he would make me like him through sheer will alone. I stopped taking his calls after he started threatening to find and beat up any male I happened to mention, be it family, friend, or boyfriend, and he would fly into a rage at the slightest thing. Sometimes he would call just to scream at me about something that happened at school that pissed him off. He started to find out which events I was going to attend by going through the entry forms his mom was sent, and he would show up and follow me around all day demanding to know why I didn't want to date him. He went as far as grabbing me and shaking me when I would try to ignore him, or grabbing at my horse's reins if I was mounted. My mom and I asked Jim's mom to stop bringing him to events as I was starting to get scared, and she accused me of leading him on and acting like I was too good for her son, when I should be considering myself lucky that someone like him would even look twice at someone like me. He eventually stopped when one of my older brothers came to an event and stood over him while telling him to leave me alone.
My family relocated to Cleveland when I was a kid. We moved to a huge, historic 2-story home constructed in the late 1800s. The lack of furniture left the rooms empty, and the floors would creak and groan with every footstep. The house was usually empty when I got home from school because both of my parents had to work. One early evening, the house was already dark when I got home from school, and I heard footsteps upstairs. I didn't think my mom was home yet, but sometimes she parked her car in the garage. I yelled, "Mom?" and I heard her sing-song voice reply, "Up here." As I climbed the stairs to figure out which room she was in, I called out to her once more, "Mom, what room are you in?" And I received the identical "up here" response. It sounded like she was in one of the far-off rooms, all the way down the long, dark hallway, but I couldn't find her because we were remodeling and I didn't know my way around the maze of rooms yet. I was nervous, but I reasoned that it was only normal in an old house, so I hurried down the hallway to find my mother in the hopes that she would make me feel better because a mother's presence always does. Just as I grabbed for the door handle to let myself in the room to find my mother, I heard the front door open, and my mother cheerfully yelled, "Honey, are you home?" I sprang back, startled, and hurried down the steps to her. As I peeked back from the top of the stairs, and the door to the room was slowly opening, I don't know what it was, but for a few seconds, I saw something in there staring directly at me. When I was 17 and my sister was 20, my mom decided a cross-country trip vacation would be fun. We had been driving what felt like all night, and it was late. We realized we were running low on gas, so we pulled over at the first rest area we had seen in over 200 miles. In addition to a van full of teenagers on a road trip, there were 2 young men standing still outside of a dark gray car that was parked in front of us at the gas station's pump. As soon as we pulled in, everything seemed off. We had been traveling for days and had passed by numerous rest spots at night without once feeling nervous. But this one was different. I stayed in the car while my mother and sister went inside. The teenagers fled quickly after, claiming to be creeped out and unable to get the pump to work. The two men had not moved at all as I was looking at their car in front of us. Not an inch. They weren't talking. Their phones were off. They were simply standing there motionless. My mother and sister sprinted back out of the store and screamed at me to start the car. The men slowly turned to look at us without moving or turning the rest of their bodies. And I swear, we all noticed the same exact thing. They had eyes as dark as coal and hollow, nothing but a void, not reflecting any light at all. My mom and sister jumped in the car, and we didn't stop till we reached the next city. What was the strangest part of the whole experience? Any map we looked at didn't show the location. We knew exactly where to look on the highway, but neither Google Maps nor any of our printed maps showed that gas station. Even when we asked the locals about the eerie gas station that was off to the side of the road, we just got confused looks or blank stares. On the way back, we drove on the same interstate, and there wasn't a gas station or rest area. We were driving through a large cemetery in my friend's beaten-down old car. After pausing, we went down a slope and came across a small pond. On the opposite side of the pond, someone was perched on a rock. The figure was completely dark, and the only distinguishable aspect was that it appeared to be wearing an antique top hat. Stupidly, we waved and yelled, "Hello!" He continued to remain motionless on the rock without making any eye contact. He suddenly leaped to his feet, began to speed toward us on the water, and then disappeared in shallow water halfway across the pond. I screamed, and my friends and I sprinted back to the car. Something was hammering on the rear of the car, and the car wouldn't start, and was making a strange noise. We could hear it every few seconds. We couldn't see anyone or anything outside in the pitch black, as the moon had gone behind a cloud. I picked up my phone and tried to call for help, but I couldn't get any service. In fact, we were all without cell service. The next 30 minutes were spent frantically trying to start the car, while the hammering noise continued. When the car finally started, she stomped on the gas pedal so hard, I thought she was going to put her foot right through the floor. Terrified, we sped through the cemetery, and all our phones instantly got service once we passed the gates. I can say with certainty that the thing outside the car that night was neither an animal nor a person, and I would never be going back there again.
This happened 5 years ago when I was still in high school. I was told to do my last delivery of my shift. I got in my car, which was a 1998 Civic, perfect for delivering pizzas. I Googled the next address on my phone. I live upstate in the country, so all pizza deliveries were long drives. I remember the sun was starting to set, so it was probably around 7 p.m. I'd say after a good 20 minutes of driving through the dirt back roads, my GPS said I'd arrived. It was an old, little cottage-like house, made almost entirely out of wood. It was sitting all by itself in the middle of absolutely nothing but forest. The lawn was completely overgrown as the grass was almost at knee height. I was used to this kind of thing, so I didn't think much of it. I took the pizza to the front door. There was no doorbell, so I knocked loudly on the door. Within a few seconds, I heard the sound of footsteps hitting wood on the inside of the house. The footsteps made it to the door and stopped. I started to feel uneasy. I got the feeling that I was being watched, and that's when I noticed there was a peephole in the door.
It's the pizza guy.
I called out. I heard a low, harsh-sounding voice on the other side of the door telling me to bring the pizza out back. I didn't like the idea of going back there. Something didn't seem right.
Are you sure, sir?
He didn't answer my question. The sound of footsteps didn't move away from the door, so I had the feeling he was still watching me. I almost found myself walking back to my car, but I decided I didn't want any trouble with my boss. The last time I brought a pizza back, he gave me attitude. So, I reluctantly walked through the uncut grass and around the small house to the back. I remember there was a shed and a little patio back there. On the patio, there was a table with 4 chairs surrounding it. In one of the chairs, facing away from me, I saw the head of somebody sitting in the seat. I began walking over and said,
"Excuse me?
but the person didn't even move an inch.
Excuse me?"
I said again, louder. Then from behind me, I heard,
Psst.
Over here!
I turned around to see a man poking his head out from the corner of the house, looking at me with a crazed smile.
Come over here! I want to show you something!
I freaked out, turned around, and ran around the house in the opposite direction back to my car, for some reason still holding the pizza. I got in my car, started it, and got away from there. On my way back to the pizzeria, I pulled over to the side of the road and called the police. Eventually, I was informed that there was no sign of anybody having been in that house for a long time. I quit my delivery job a few days after that. I have no idea what would have happened had I gone up to that man, but to this day I still wished I had just turned my head to see who or what was sitting in that patio chair. Working the night shift always sucked. I work in an office building and would constantly do the night shifts. I was just about the only person on the floor I worked on, possibly in the whole building. There would always be a kind of eerie feeling to being in such a big building, with most of the lights out and absolutely no one around. But on the upside, it was quiet and less stressful, and I was able to get a lot of work done. There was this one night, though. It was a Friday night around 2 in the morning. I was typing away at my keyboard when I heard a noise from outside my cubicle. It sounded like just a random crack from the walls or something like that. It's unusual in this building as it's in good shape, but I didn't get too concerned about it. I resumed typing away and was once again interrupted by a sound. This time it was the sound of a computer starting up. It caught me off guard. I was absolutely sure no one else was working the night shift. I stood up on my chair to get a view over the cubicle walls, and the glare of a computer screen in the dark was visible in a cubicle on the opposite side of the room. Then I did something stupid, something I regret. I asked if there was anyone there in a yell, hoping to get an answer from a fellow employee, but instead, I saw the glaring light of the computer monitor turn off. And there was once again nothing but darkness on that side of the room. I started getting nervous. I turned off the lamp and computer screen so I wouldn't give away my position to whoever that was. I crouched down and tiptoed out across to a nearby cubicle. There was just utter silence. I sat there waiting for something to happen. For what seemed like forever, but I eventually decided the coast was clear. I tiptoed down past all the cubicles until an opening near the exit door to the stairs and elevator. And that's when I realized that my fearful suspicion was true. There was a man crouched down behind a plant in the corner of the room, dressed in all black. I felt my heart sink as I noticed him, but it didn't seem like he knew that I saw him there. I turned back to the stairway door. There was no way I was going to wait for the elevator and take a chance. I casually opened the door and closed it behind me, proceeding to walk down the stairs. After making it down about 2 flights of stairs, I heard the door above me push open aggressively, followed by manic, echoing footsteps coming fast down the stairs. I raced down the stairs, running as fast as I could, as the footsteps above me were getting louder. I finally made it to the first floor, raced through the lobby, and out the front door. Whoever was in there didn't follow me. I immediately called the cops along with one of my bosses. My boss said that no one was scheduled to work except for me. The cops scanned the place from top to bottom. There was no one in there. I couldn't help them out with any description other that he was wearing all black. I did continue to do the night shift for about a week after that, with my boss allowing me to lock all possible entrances to the floor, including the elevators. But I still wasn't comfortable with it. So ever since I've been doing the day shifts, I still wonder what that man was doing there and what would have happened if I hadn't got away.
My grandmother lives in a very old house that was built in the late 1700s, and it has graveyards on both sides. I was visiting, and my friend who I hadn't seen in months stops by to say hello. We are walking along the old cobblestone driveway when he begins talking about his newfound spirituality, with regards to feeling tuned in to things. He had been away at a rehab program, and I believe that he experienced some kind of cerebral or spiritual awakening. Anyways, as we are talking, my grandmother's cat walks over to us and starts rubbing up against my leg. After a while, I realize she won't quit and that she is trying to tell me something. I start to follow her, and I soon realize she is going to the graveyard. Every time I stop following her, she turns around and rubs my leg until I begin walking behind her again. When we finally get to the graveyard, she jumps up on a gravestone, balancing on the slender part of the stone, and will not move. She begins hissing when we try to take her off the headstone. After some research, we realize that the grave was a woman who had lived and died in our house in 1925.
Number 2. The girl.
6 years ago when I was 17, I was staying the night at my best friend's house. We were sleeping on the bed and I woke up in the middle of the night. There was a girl, around 6 or 7 years old, standing at the foot of the bed looking at us. I was so freaked out I just kept looking back at her. I was too scared to do anything. Eventually, she slowly faded away. I swear this really happened, but I'm not sure if it was a ghost or if it was somehow semi-awake and I dreamed it. Scariest thing I ever experienced though, regardless if it was my imagination or really a ghost. I didn't tell my friend for a couple months because I couldn't really believe it, so I thought he definitely wouldn't. Then a few months later, he was telling me how one night they were in his room and he heard kids laughing in the family room. He went to his bedroom door to listen better, and when he got to the door, there was a loud thunk on it, like someone hit it. He ran out of the room thinking someone was in the house, but when he checked the house, there was no one there and all of the doors were still locked. I told him about the girl I saw when he told me the story, and his face turned pale white.
Number 3. Ice cold.
I was with my girlfriend at the time. We were laying in my bed and the lights were out. We weren't talking, just both thinking. All of a sudden she rolls over and hugs me really tightly. I, of course, hug her back. But then this feeling just hit me. If I wasn't already laying down, it would have knocked me over. It was a total feeling of dread and panic. I'll admit, I have had panic attacks in the past, but this definitely wasn't the same. I hugged my girlfriend back as hard as I could. I never felt a feeling like this before. My girlfriend is one of those people who always is really warm. But even in her arms, I felt ice cold. I could feel this evil, awful feeling, and it seemed like it was coming from one corner of the room. It was kind of like sensing your friend behind you when they aren't saying anything. I honestly believe there was a demon or something in my room. I got the courage to speak, and I said, "Cindy, do you feel that?" And she felt a cold, evil feeling. This all lasted about a minute. She decided to call her friend who was studying to be a youth pastor. I got up and turned the lights on and came back to the bed. She called Ryan and put him on speakerphone. Ryan prayed for us, and we both closed our eyes and listened, praying in our heads. When the prayer was done, the room felt lighter, and it wasn't cold anymore. But after a little small talk to ease the tension, Ryan asked, "Were you two talking while I was praying?" We were like, "Of course not. We were just listening." He said he heard from the phone a deep, gravelly voice telling him to stop. And he said he felt an awful, cold, evil feeling overcome him while he was praying. That freaked me out, and my girlfriend drove home immediately afterwards because she was super freaked out too. I went in my dad's room to tell him I thought that a demon came into my room. He was sleeping though, and just muttered something about going back to sleep. Thanks, Dad. So yes, I am convinced it was a demon or some kind of evil spirit. It never came back, but why did it come in the first place? That's the problem I have with the whole thing. What was it trying to accomplish? I don't think I'll ever know.